Hello, hello, hello there, friends and family, and welcome back to another Let's Harp About It right here on the Harassment and Assault Reporting platform. Yes, so please take a quick second, okay, maybe two or three, share, like, let the people know that we are live, okay? Whether you're watching live or you're watching later, yeah, let the people know, because you know what? You know what we're talking about today on Let's Harp About It? If you caught the memos, we will be talking about what? Uh, the PA pardons process as well as life beyond incarceration. So, I mean, it's gonna be Letty either way. Yes, my Queen's English came out really strong there. It'll be Letty. But yeah, so take a quick second, let people know we're live, and really we're gonna jump right into it, okay? Because this is important stuff, and yeah, I don't want to belabor the point. But before we bring my special guest, my very special guest today, I'm so excited. I'm so excited to have him. Like I told you guys, I'm bringing y'all some really cool people, and this is one of those. So he'll be right here shortly. But before we get into that, remember, HARP focuses on all things harassment and assault, education and awareness, as well as prevention, right? Making sure that we are normalizing the conversations that really need to be happening in society, right? Good, bad, and different, making sure that we are getting more comfortable having these conversations that for some are uncomfortable, but for others, that's their lived experiences. These are our lived experiences. And it is important to elevate these voices, right? And make sure that, we are helping to more positively change the narratives so that people can own the fullness of who they are in all that they do. And so, as you guys know, I have harped on the legal system several times, right? I've had, oh God, so many people, right? But Alex Dominguez is one of my favorite people who he's with the ACLU here in PA. We've harped about the legal system, the injustice, and the just complex moments that tend to happen when we're talking about the criminal legal system. So whether we're talking about commutations or any of the injustices or the power and impact of a pardon, right? We cannot skip over also the historical complexities of these issues, right? Whether it was unfair sentencing practices or unfair targeting practices, especially for controlled substances, right? Particularly for Black and Brown people versus our dominant culture folks. These are important things to address holistically when you're talking about the criminal injustice system or the criminal legal system, the law surrounding it, the policies, and even in 2021, perhaps some of the policies that do need to be revisited and possibly changed and amended, yes, yeah, and so also, right, when we're talking about commutations, quick moment here, right? This is when you are able to substitute for a lesser penalty after a conviction has been given. And so, as I was doing my research, data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics shows a slight decrease of about 3% for the combined state and federal incarceration rates between the years of 2018 and 2019. This was about 419 people per 100,000. And this was apparently the lowest imprisonment rate in the US over the past 24 years. But you know what? We still have some states that are really leading and blazing the path out there. And it's our usual culprits, right? From the highest to lowest. Of our top 10 incarcerators, we have Louisiana, Oklahoma, Mississippi, Arkansas, Arizona, Texas, Kentucky, Georgia, Idaho, and obviously they're never left out. Who? Florida, as you guessed it. And you see a pattern there? You see a pattern? Yeah, we're not gonna get into that today. But all this, to really highlight the importance of pardons, the importance of the Board of Pardons, especially here in Pennsylvania, right? And understanding that also, quick plug here, yes, you can get more information about the Board of Pardons at bop.pa.gov. Okay. Don't forget that. So do check that out. That's www.bop.pa.gov. There's a lot of relevant information there, whether it's board meeting dates, application process, frequently asked questions, understanding like, hey, what does a pardon even do, right? And for those of you who are unfamiliar, actually, I got this information from their page. It relieves any legal disability that could be resulting from a conviction, which include but are not limited to, right, the right to vote, I'm glad that that's actually like top up the right to vote, because a lot of people don't even know, if they are eligible to vote. But we'll be talking more about that with Secretary Flood, right? The right to be a juror, the right to hold a public office, the right to bear arms, the opportunity to serve in the military if you wish to do so, the right to obtain or carry a firearm, the right to, as well as the right to travel internationally. Now, family, okay, if you know me, I love my travel, so that's an important thing. And so there's also statistics by year, which I may touch on shortly. But if you'd like more information on that, it does address, the requests that have been heard, how many are still pending, and currently the review and approval rate. I am mad at it. I'm not mad at it, and as well as those that are still pending in the governor's office. Yeah, so it's understandable. Okay, we're still in 2021. We still got a couple months to go for 2021. So we're good. And also understanding, I cannot skip the fact that 2020 was COVID year, right? Well, the beginning of COVID, right? Because now we're in COVID part two. And COVID absolutely had a significant impact on our incarcerated populations. And so, we'll also kind of touch a little bit on that. But that's high level because I want to give my guest ample time to really kind of begin unpacking some of these topics. And so, with that, I would like to invite Secretary Brandon Flood, or I like to call him B Flood. How are
Hey,
you?
I'm good. I'm
Oh,
good. Thanks for having me.
welcome to Harp. Welcome to Let's Harp About It, because we're gonna harp about it. First of all, I know this is your first time on Let's Harp About It, and so, but people know you.
Intimidated. I'm
Yeah,
intimidated.
it's really. Yeah. So I'd like to give you the opportunity to at least, for step one, just introduce yourself to the people. Let them know who you are. For those who may be unfamiliar with who you are out here in this, internet streets, let them know, and we'll just jump right into it.
Sure. So, my name's Brandon Flood. I serve as the Secretary of the Pennsylvania Board of Pardons. I was appointed to this post April 1st of 2019 by our 34th Lieutenant Governor, John Fetterman. What the Secretary does, what the role of the Secretary, especially when we talk about in state or federal government, the Secretary is the Chief Administrator of any given agency. So I serve as the Chief Administrator of the Pennsylvania Board of Pardons. The services that we provide is we deal in the business of executive clemency. Winnie, you touched on it earlier. Executive clemency is defined as mercy or forgiveness extended from the executive branch, that's the governor, to anyone that's been convicted of a crime in Pennsylvania. So executive clemency, our board only deals with cases that have gone through the court of common pleas or on the magistrate level. We don't deal with the federal level. Any federal convictions, there's a whole separate process for that. The office of the pardon attorney, as well as the president, that's who deals with the federal conviction. So what my job is as secretary is, it's multifaceted. Certainly being able to drive our policy making. The lieutenant governor, his principal reason for tapping me for this post was to make this process more efficient, to modernize the way that we do business. We're not a new agency. We've been around longer than most. We've been around for almost 150 years. So a lot of our processes are very much antiquated. We've made some significant strides over the last 2.5 years, but there's a ton of room for improvement. So I drive the policy. I obviously deal with from the administrative side, the intake of applications, the processing of applications, the vetting of applications, the preparation of cases for board members, the scheduling of hearings, and then ultimately for those that successfully receive the governor's signature, transmitting it to the proper criminal justice agencies for the purposes of pardoning someone. So, and I should also mention, so that's what my job is as secretary. But when it comes to executive clemency, there's a 5-member board that oversees that process and that ultimately votes on that. And I'll touch more on that later.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. That was a very thorough intro and review. So I really appreciate that. But please stick around because there's a whole lot more to unpack here today, right? And so, uh, first of all, I would also want to kind of like tag onto an event we did earlier this year, which is actually kind of the impetus as to why I was like, I need to make sure I have you on harp because just it's important. I see the work that you've been doing in terms of just encouraging people and letting them know really like what are the options out there for them, right? In terms of clemency or the pardons process. Because I keep saying this and I'll keep saying it, just because something is available does not mean that it's accessible to everybody, right? And how people get access to information is different, and we reach different people depending on what we say, how we say it, and the mechanisms to which we put out the information. And so I've seen you, really, put in the work out there, and I really want to honor you for that, step one. And I remember when we did the civic engagement, power and politics session, I love the fact that you took a moment to address the fact that when we were talking about voting rights, right, you made sure to like plug and remind people that just because you may have been convicted doesn't mean that you can no longer have access to voting. Because I know even with the voting season coming in, that's one of the topics that pops up, quite often, right? People are like, oh, I have a felony, or I've been arrested before, or I have a misdemeanor. And there's a lot of confusion on that side of things. So maybe we'll touch into that shortly. So I'm teasing people here for a second. But before we get into that, let's kind of take a quick stroll back on your memory lane, I hope. Can you kind of give the people just a high level on what has been your journey to this point? Like, did you always want to get into politics? Like, what was your journey to that, from a young Brandon Flood to now Secretary Flood?
From a baby? It's like, no,
I mean, okay,
no,
we
no,
don't
no,
have
I
to go
got
all the way
you.
to toddler.
I-
But I mean, your
so when I came
your
out the
whole
womb,
is
I
like
knew
the
that I
student
wanted
movement.
to, I
Yeah,
knew I
I'm
wanted to
not.
tackle executive clemency straight out the womb.
I,
No,
well, yeah,
no, the
I
one
can
that
see
you,
you being born with a bow tie, because you and your bow ties, Lord.
no, I got you. One of the unique aspects about my appointment is that I also was a recipient of a pardon too. So I've been through it as a recipient. And March 17th exactly of 2019, Governor Wolf issued my pardon, which allowed me to clear my record, which set the stage for me to be able to oversee the Pennsylvania Board of Pardons, which is classified as a criminal justice agency. So I do hold that distinction of being the first formerly convicted felon to oversee a criminal justice agency. So to your point about that journey, obviously, I said that I needed a pardon. So certainly that meant that suggests that I've gotten into some trouble myself. I served 9 years in the Department of Corrections, 4 years as an 18-year-old for possession with intent to deliver cocaine. Came home, still had that mindset. Subsequently arrested for possession with intent to deliver cocaine and possession of an unlicensed firearm. That netted me a 5 to 10 year sentence. But even preceding that, I had as a juvenile, I was as they call it, juvenile delinquent, a wayward youth. I was a frequent flyer at Schaffner Youth Center. For any folks that worked there at that time, certainly they see me quite a bit there. Also went to 2 juvenile placements, Northwestern Academy, which was a high impact boot camp, 4 months. It was meant to kind of be shock treatment, before someone goes off to that intermediate or long-term juvenile facility. Went through that, subsequently arrested again, did about 9 months in Nebraxis, up in Marionville. So I've always, at least since I've been about 12, been under supervision, probation, and ensnared in that juvenile system. That was the prelude to my, I guess, entree into the adult system. So that's what my life was like. Certainly as a youngster, I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. Probably wasn't until I was about 25 and was incarcerated during my second sentence that I was bitten by the political bug. What happened, just to give an abridged version of what happened, is there was a state senator that came up to our institution. I was at SCI Chester at the time. At the time, I was completely green when it came to government. I couldn't tell you back then, and this is 2005, mind you, I couldn't tell you the difference between Congress and city council. So this senator came up for whatever reason, you could call it providence or divine influence. The warden of the institution asked me to introduce the senator. And, obviously I didn't know who he was. So I got, they gave me some time with the librarian. She printed out a lot of stuff. And the senator's name was Stuart Greenleaf. He passed, I believe, late last year. So he came up to the prison. I gave him a warm introduction. He was a Republican senator as well. Was a former prosecutor. He was the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. So he came up to talk to us about what his colleagues discussed in his committee, right, and how public policy is drafted and crafted when it comes to the criminal justice system. So he was giving us the inside scoop, and for me, it was what he said, and it was that insider information, and more importantly, me being from Harrisburg, right? So for anyone who's watching who may not know, but Pennsylvania Harrisburg is considered the seat of government in Pennsylvania. We are the epicenter of politics. So for me, right. So for him, I was certainly inspired by his commentary, and it couldn't have been a better place for me to return back to upon my release if I was going to go into government or politics than Harrisburg. So, yeah, that's when I got bit. It took for me to be 25. Ended up coming home. For anyone that doesn't know the makeup of the Pennsylvania General Assembly, it's 253 legislators, 50 senators, 203 representatives. So I felt I had good odds. I was seeking out an internship, so I had 253 bites at the apple, so to speak. Luckily for me, it only took one bite. There was a representative out of Philadelphia. He's now deceased. His name was Frank Oliver Sr. Never even met him. A friend of mine facilitated the conversation, and he gave me an internship on the spot. And from there, it just was, once I seen how the sausage was made, I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I kind of immersed myself in how the legislative process works. And, eventually was able to make have some upward mobility, became a legislative assistant, a research associate, a research analyst, a senior research analyst, executive director. And then I left the legislature to go work for SEIU for a brief spell. That's the Service Employees International Union for Pennsylvania. We represent, I served as their legislative director for the state. So we represented airport workers, nurses, correctional officers. Did that for about a year and then came back to government with the Department of General Services as their policy and reporting specialist. Our emphasis was on diversity, inclusion, and small business opportunities. As you know very well, Winnie, our Commonwealth spends billions of dollars in procurement every year, and a lot of billions with a B, and a lot of black and brown folks. Oftentimes, you talked there earlier, you alluded to access, right? A lot of black and brown folks don't have access. So part of my job was creating policies to ensure that black and brown folks can participate more fully in our state procurement process. So was there for a spell until which time that I was appointed by a lieutenant governor. And from there, the rest was history. So, been in government for about going on 11 years now. And certainly I've had quite a ride.
You said a lot in a very quick amount of time, right? Like it's almost like, okay, like can we parse out into like segments? Because first of all, I really do appreciate your candor from the clarity of how you initially got involved with the criminal legal or the legal system, right? From as a young kid who perhaps seemed wayward, right, to say the least. And just I also want to acknowledge that oftentimes, right, when we see circumstances such as that, it's not just about the individual, right? We also have to, yes, the individual has to take responsibility for their actions, right, in the matter. But we also have to also look at the environment in which these circumstances and outcomes root from, right? So if you happen to have found yourself in an environment that was perhaps a proper breeding ground for such outcomes, it's almost inevitable, right? If you look at it holistically, because and there's something that I had touched on with Alex Dominguez when we were talking about if we have more policing, higher rates of policing or over policing in certain areas, right? Because the research shows that white neighborhoods do comparably there's controlled substances drug related concerns for both white neighborhoods as well as non-white, Black and brown neighborhoods, right? But the issue is that we see these higher trends of increased citations, increased, warnings, increased arrests, as well as higher penalties, right? In terms of the adjudications that are associated with those cases. And so understanding understanding that this is a holistic legal system issue. It's not just the judge's problem. It's not just the person who's going to be incarcerated problem, right? It is, we have to then address the whole legal system, right? Because like people, because even as we had been working on, let's say the H can't wait process with Bill 8, people tend to focus so much just on the policing component and saying, oh, we want less policing, or we want to address policing. But if you're going to address policing, we also have to address the judges, right? We have to address the legal representation, the lawyers, right? Whether it's private or the publicly appointed persons, right? Because even as I was looking on the BOP's page, right, one of the frequently asked questions is, do I need a lawyer to, start this process or to submit an application? And one of the answers is like, no, like you can actually like do this yourself. But I mean, and there's assistance in that, and that's what I'm saying. It's important to provide the necessary assistance for people who are navigating that process, right? And because here, if we're talking about the pardons process, so just understanding, I really want to provide contextual understanding that we can't solve these problems in silos. Typically, I'm talking about that in like another show about the issue of silos, but like we can't solve these issues of perceived criminality, actual criminality, and folks navigating the system, whether they're in it, they've come out of it, or on the flip side as politicians, right, and community servants, right? And so if we address that and go back to the understanding of how you started in, as quote unquote, the juvenile delinquent, as they used to say it back in the day, and then you figure your way through it, and then you got out, still kind of like had some growing up to do, find yourself back in it, and then fate kind of intervenes, and you're like, oh, this is a thing I could do. Like, to me, it is so important to continue providing that hope for people, right? And for you to be able to speak so candidly and share your story and share your lived experience in the process. I really want people to get how big that is, because oftentimes stories such as yours are the exception to the rule. And I want us to be very clear on that, right? Me as an advocate, as a community advocate of, folks who have happened to survive some otherwise very, horrific experiences, whether it's in the system or otherwise, it is important that we continue to boldly tell the story, because we also know that a lot happens for those who happen to still be in the system or navigating that process, right? Even in 2021, right? There's a lot of issues when we're talking about harassment or assault or any kind of abuse, right? We have to be realistic about that. And so even as we're talking about, advocacy and COVID, right? What have been maybe some trends? I mean, you can keep it to COVID impacts if you want, but as one on the board of pardons, what are some of the top concerns that you hear often, in context of abuse, harassment, assault, or just better representation in that space? You're muted. You're muted.
One of the things that we're hearing, and it may have always been expressed, prior to me coming on, was this process for clemency is really set up for those that admit guilt, or either partial culpability or full culpability. So for those that are caught up in the system that are
Mm-hmm.
actually innocent,
Mm-hmm.
the executive clemency isn't necessarily the ideal mechanism to deal with these cases. That said,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
folks still apply, in huge numbers, and these are cases that we're forced to deal with, and we're looking at these cases through in my opinion, a skewed lens. So what we're trying to do is at least create some kind of mechanism to be able, because we don't have the capacity to relitigate cases, but there are some instances where you can see, the writing is clear on the wall, right? And it doesn't take much unpacking, so to speak. So that's something that we hear a lot, and that's one of the biggest criticisms is because even on our application, if you go and look right now and it says, explain what your role was in your crime, not if you participated. It's presumed that so, a lot of folks that are innocent don't know how to handle that, right? Or it's
Yes.
discouraging. You see that, you automatically check out and say, hey, I'm not even going to apply. So that's one of the biggest criticisms and grievances relative to this process that we received, at least when it comes to the system. Obviously, there's some administrative grievances that obviously people want their pardons processed quickly as possible. And we're working on that. But at least when we talk about, I guess, structurally, that's where the biggest issue has been when it comes to applicants that either have been wrongfully convicted or are factually innocent.
Yes, yes. I'm glad you went there because when we talk about wrongful convictions, right? I know it also ties into the Innocence Project and DNA being used to exonerate people decades after they've been in the system and served their time. And we've seen how that has played out time and time again. Oftentimes, again, black and brown people, right? And especially in a city that is majority black people and brown people, to me that is something that we do need to maybe have a higher um gaze upon, especially
I
as we
should
are
I should
maybe
also say too, it's not that
yeah.
so obviously me identifying what the problem is or recounting what the grievances are, we're not just listening and not doing anything about it. So we are, you referenced the Pennsylvania Innocence Project. We are working together on creating an addendum to the application. So folks who are actually innocent or were wrongfully convicted, that our board is looking at these applications through a more appropriate lens. So I've given the Pennsylvania Innocence Project pretty much carte blanche to say, hey, you guys are the experts. You guys tease out what kind of questions our board members or our application should be asking, or what kind of information should be included on those addendums. COVID, unfortunately, kind of put us behind the eight ball, or put the Innocence Project behind the eight ball, but it is an ongoing project and certainly something that I would like to see implemented at least before this administration terms out in January of 2023.
Thank you for that. Yeah, he goes like you really picking up what I'm putting down here, so I really appreciate that. um yeah, like, oh, I am loving this. I am loving this. And so when going back to the election availability, or rather accessibility, can you touch a little bit more on that in terms of when folks talk about, am I eligible to vote? How do I vote? If either I have that, pre-conviction, or I'm in pre-trial, because that's the other thing people are usually unaware of, or yeah, oh, I have a misdemeanor, or like this is my first time in the system and I don't know, how do I navigate that?
All right. Well, yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm gonna give myself a little bit of a plug and also some homework for the viewers.
Okay.
So you heard me mention, just maybe a minute ago, I talked about this administration terming out January 2023. So the way it works, at least for me and my position, is the secretary is an appointed position. I report to whoever the lieutenant governor is. So when the next lieutenant governor, whoever he or she is, comes in, obviously their prerogative to keep or keep myself or retain me, or go in another direction. So we talk about elections mattering. Certainly elections mattered with John Fetterman, certainly him appointing me to this post and having the chutzpah to put someone with my background, that with the background that I had in this position, and having faith in us having that shared vision. So it's it dovetails into who's eligible for voting, right? So we're thinking prospectively to 2020, technically 2022, going into 2023. That's when the governor's race will be, and the lieutenant governor's race. So when it comes to who's eligible, one of the biggest misconceptions And the reason why this misconception persists as much as it does is because there's a hodgepodge of different laws in different states. Different states do different things. Eligible, different folks are eligible in different states. So we oftentimes conflate what another state prescribes
Yes.
with what's happening in Pennsylvania. So in Pennsylvania, the way it works, it used to be you had to wait 5 years from being released from prison in order to vote. I believe that went away in about 2001. So now your rights are restored immediately upon being released from prison. So as long as you're able to register within that 30-day window for the next election, you're eligible as soon as you're released from prison. When you touched on even before your sentence, the pre-sentence rules. So if you are in the county, or no, if you, it really doesn't matter if you're county or state, if you're in prison and you're awaiting trial, you can vote via absentee ballot. I know one of the things that we've done is work closely with Dauphin County Prison to make sure that this information's in all of the rule books. Folks have those absentee ballots at their disposal and they know how to go about that process. So you can vote under pretrial basis as well. And I guess I'll use this as an opportunity to talk about what all you talked about, what a pardon restores. It restores all your civil rights, but voting isn't one of those because again, it's restored upon your release or under
Mhm.
pretrial basis. So yeah, I would tell anyone, right? Err on the side of them telling you can't vote. Don't screen yourself out. I'm telling you right here, right now, live and in living color, what your rights are as a reentrant or formerly incarcerated person, or a person with pending charges on the pretrial basis. So exercise your vote. Err on the side of being wrong versus presuming that you're wrong.
Myself, I mean myself. No, absolutely. Like, and for me, looking at the trends, right? Especially when you take into consideration gerrymandering that tends to happen, right? When you take into consideration just the interesting sagas that voting seasons bring, that is definitely one of those things often that oftentimes kind of maybe doesn't get as much light. And it's really important that we highlight and we remind people, because I know especially with YPOC, there was the one year we were literally like writing like cards and like reminders for, I think it was for folks who were eligible to vote, and I believe was in Florida, but they were unaware of it, right, because of their prior convictions. But like legally their term, whatever that term had ended, and we just wanted to remind people, and it's also like plugging out there, if you're a community advocacy group that likes to do this kind of work, please do that, right? Share the information, especially if you're here in Pennsylvania, you're getting it straight from the source. Please be sure to send out those reminders. It is important to vote, because that is how we influence the policies that are that are impacting our lives, our daily lives, right? Whether it's federal or like state, all the way down to municipal levels. Right? When we vote, whoever you happen to vote for, I'm not the one to tell people who to vote for, but whoever you choose to vote in a voting election, in a voting cycle, that matters, right? And especially if you've been in the system, if you've had some sort of run-in with the system, you have a particular experience that really hopefully should inspire you to want to either make a change by voting, or be an active participant like Secretary Brandon Flood, in terms of really being active and proactive to say, I want to get involved in how the sausage is made, right? So whether it's volunteering or serving as a public servant, or as an advocate, all these things are important. And so I also want to touch on another question before we got to leave here. Oh my gosh, time is flying so fast. um, um I want to touch on, maybe it's a two-part question, right? Given that we've talked about what could happen if we happen to find ourselves in environments that put inadvertently put us in position, could put folks in positions to get into the system. And statistics also have shown that, like, those who happen to start with the system as young fellows, in the, let's say, in the juvenile in the juvenile system have a higher likelihood of then, going on to adult incarceration facilities, right? Especially when you talk about the school to prison pipeline, which is a very real thing, right? And it really affects, one's potential for generational wealth, access to certain opportunities of employment, access to capital, right? If you then want to be an entrepreneur, it really has a multitude of potential impacts. And so when we talk about that, right, I genuinely want to ask you, you in your role now as as a secretary of the board of pardons, what are you doing in your role to ensure that stories such as yours are more of the norm and not just the exception to the rule? Because the other time we hear that story, like, oh my god, so and so child, okay, yeah, okay, so he was a thief, but you know what, he became the president, he became the CEO of this company, he became this, right? But those oftentimes that's not the norm. Like that's the unicorn, right? And especially for our brothers, like and I'm talking here, family, like for our brothers and sisters, I want us to be able to see that as the norm of potential.
No, yeah, I got you. I'm definitely a unique and extraordinary individual, but when we talk about, just
Well,
kidding.
it's yourself.
When we talk
Put
about
yourself
the
in front.
context, when we talk about it in the context of, especially if we look in the state system, you have 12,000 people, 12,000 men and women that are leaving from those institutions every year. And, admittedly, and I'm a big proponent of saying that I'm not the exception, I'm the example, right? The example of, you give folks opportunity, you give them the benefit of the doubt, and you allow them to do their thing, give them space. You'll see a lot of favorable outcomes. And even in the neighborhood I grew up in, I wasn't the smartest one in my neighborhood. I think I was maybe third in my crew, or maybe five. So that just goes to show that there were other folks that had more brilliant minds and were more academically inclined than I was, but just didn't have either the opportunity, the guidance, or the space to
Yeah.
exercise their gifts. So yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And part of my job is paying it forward. You talked about it earlier. I'm big on access. When we talk about public officials and judging the job that they do or their performance, I look at two things: how accessible are you, and how responsive are you,
Mm.
right? So I try to be super accessible. I get tons of DMs, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, obviously out and about, and I make myself available. I do a lot of one-on-one consults. Obviously, we can now leverage technology, and I can do a lot of these things virtually. So yeah, I definitely try to make sure to pay it forward. I'm not someone that hoards knowledge. I share it very freely, and so if nothing else, at least with executive clemency, we've made a number of strides administratively, but this is as accessible as it's been in its 150-year history. So, and then in terms of responsiveness, obviously, I'm kind of in grind mode. Me staying in grind mode is what keeps me out of trouble. So I may not respond the day of, but I always do respond, and so those are two things that I hang my hat on as a public official, and so my goal is to make sure that we often talk about, there are three major fields or industries where Black and brown folks are underrepresented to our detriment. Law enforcement. You talked about policing and the ability, over policing and focusing and having police officers in communities where they don't live or where they're not familiar. A lot of that's driven by a lot of Black and brown folks that are interested in careers in law enforcement due to petty convictions or due to nonviolent convictions, aren't able to penetrate those fields, and as a result are disqualified for a lot of positions. It's just not police officers either. So same thing for the medical field too, right? You have a
Yes, I was
conviction.
about to say.
You talked about
Yeah.
the controlled, especially even convictions for controlled substances, nonviolent offenses that can prevent you from being able to make inroads within the medical field. And then more importantly, you talked about the school to prison pipeline. One other area where Black and brown folks are underrepresented, particularly males, is the education field, right? It's kind of the same
Sure.
standard that's applied for law enforcement
Yeah.
and in the healthcare field. Any conviction can really hamper your efforts and can prevent you from becoming certified to be a teacher. So, and as a result, you have those poor academic outcomes because of that disparity. So for us, for me,
Mhm.
I definitely try to make sure that for folks like myself, where the light bulb or that epiphany came at 25 or 28 or 30, folks know what they want to do. They went to school, they've gotten the credentials only to be told that they can't because of a conviction. That's kind of what keeps me motivated, is being able to help shepherd people through this process and then allow them to be able to enter those fields, and not just enter them, but to be able to thrive as well. So, that's that. I'm definitely, vocation is one of the areas that I look at, and certainly we want to do more work outside of just the board of partners. Start doing some things collaboratively with the Department of Labor and Industry. Right? Because a lot of people don't really give a shit about having the conviction on their record. They will happily
Mm,
bear the conviction if they can still be able to get a family sustaining career or a job
yes,
or license or be able to
yes,
volunteer, right? So
yes.
that's the thing that we're trying to be able to bridge that gap. There's some folks that
Mhm.
may not be ready, or the board may not feel it was appropriate to clear their record entirely, but during those instances still be able to provide them with resources and the ability to earn a living and thrive. So that's what keeps my fire burning, and that's how I pay it forward as well.
I love that. And you really touched on something important, right? The importance of paying it forward, right? When at times you may not necessarily see how it comes back to you, right? The impact of what you do in those seasons of paying it forward. Fam, out there, if you're listening, please, if you have the opportunity to pay it forward, if you happen to, be that exception to the rule, please do so, and do so with intention, and be very intentional in that process, because oftentimes people assume it's just going to happen. It will eventually happen by accident, right? By happenstance. These changes that are needed in communities, especially in Black and brown and underserved, in minoritized communities, in misrepresented, underrepresented, and unrepresented communities, these changes that are needed will not happen by happenstance. It will require intentional momentum to move it forward. And one of the things I also want to drop in here before we go is the fact that you have been an avid proponent, you as well as the lieutenant governor, and I believe the governor himself, the policies on marijuana decriminalization and legalization, right? And there's actually something that came up, right? It came up. You're muted, by the way. I definitely want you to correct.
I said
It
yes, two thumbs up.
right, because I don't want to misquote you and I don't want to misrepresent you. But it is definitely something that came up uh during the primary elections, as people were vying for candidacy, and so for positions. And so, maybe could you touch a little bit upon that in context of your role currently, or potential future roles that you or how do you see that maybe changing in society, because there is a direct impact, there's a direct correlation to how communities are, monitored, how you enforce something as simple as traffic infractions, right? Or minor traffic moving violations, how literally, like, the adjudications, right? The conviction rates of, depending what the amounts or whatever, literally sentences could vary by the judicial, like, boundaries. So, and
Right.
understanding that, you could be one county, 2 feet later, you have a very different outcome. And so, if you can kind of just quickly touch on that, and how could the community get involved? How do we, mobilize for better policies? Because it's not just about users, right? And the misperception of who's a user, who's an abuser, who is, who are the producers, who are the suppliers, because even the visual representation of that has changed drastically over the last couple of decades, and even just the normalization of it, let's say, in society, depending state by state, Pennsylvania included. But go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, both the lieutenant governor and I, we both share the sentiment that Pennsylvania should legalize recreational use of cannabis for adults. No equivocations. That's where we're at with it. And more importantly, beyond just doing that, is for the folks that have been criminalized and that bear criminal convictions and that have been suffer those collateral consequences, that their records need to be retroactively expunged. So
Thank
obviously
you.
the governor also shares that sentiment as well, but it's the legislature that is Republican controlled that kind of balks at that notion. They're not ready for that. So for us, at least we've been proactive as a board, saying, hey, listen, it's not a matter of if Pennsylvania is going to legalize, it's just a matter of when. That's guaranteed. What's not guaranteed is what I just mentioned, is will that bill include any provisions that provide retroactive relief to those that have been previously convicted? As you see now, you can ride through every neighborhood almost in Pennsylvania, I mean, in Harrisburg, and the dispensaries are there like McDonald's with drive-throughs, right? So medical marijuana is sanctioned. It's only a matter of time. So we wanted to be proactive. So we created an expedited review program for marijuana-related offenses. We're able to process those applications in half of the time that we process our traditional applications, and that's been successful too. Because you often hear that. So there's not too many people that are incarcerated for marijuana alone. But what the issue is that if you incur a conviction for marijuana, if you incur a subsequent conviction, they have what's known as a gravity score, right? So they look at what your previous marijuana conviction can result, if you incur a new or subsequent conviction, can result in incarceration. So it's almost an indirect method of incarceration, and that's what drives those rates and increases those gravity scores. So yeah, we're definitely doing what we can, and we're being proactive, being able to provide relief to folks, because you mentioned it. There are a ton of collateral consequences that folks suffer just from having a roach, being convicted of possessing a roach of marijuana from 10 years ago. In Pennsylvania, you can't even obtain a concealed carry permit, no matter how long ago your simple possession charge was. So again, that goes back to, if someone wants to be a police officer, right? That marijuana conviction will prevent you from being able to legally be able to become a police officer. So, and for something as small as that, right? Literally a roach from 20 years ago can prevent you from being a police officer. So, we're trying to do what we can. Obviously, we've been at least I've been proactive on the local level as well too. We work with former city councilman Cornelius Johnson at the passed Bill 4, which is a form of decriminalization for small possession in Harrisburg, and then also worked with Councilwoman Keontae Hodge, also my son's mother, for Stilton, decriminalizing marijuana in their borough as well. So, we're looking at doing some things on a local level, and I think the more that the local level moves on this issue, it will force the hand of the states and the feds, and more importantly, our local municipalities. They're revenue starved, right? So you guys have an opportunity, while the state and the feds bullshit, you guys have an opportunity to capture that revenue. It doesn't have to be in a tax form. There's a lot of innovative ways. So one of the big things that I'm pushing for, at least for Harrisburg, and then hopefully you'll hear within the next couple of months, is I want our city to create a commission on responsible adult cannabis usage, right? And be able to have that commission tease out what responsible adult cannabis usage looks like in Harrisburg. And obviously there will potentially be revenue generating component of that. And it's something that can be done on the local level. And, because folks are smoking right now, whether you like it or not, right? So why not look at this through a more responsible lens, and then more importantly, driving some tourism and revenue to our city. It's not like we don't need it. So that's certainly a conversation that I'll have with folks with this administration, and depending upon what happens in November with whomever's at the helm then. So yeah, definitely both the lieutenant governor and I we consider ourselves 420 friendly.
I listen. I appreciate you sharing the information with the people because it's important, right? This is what I keep saying. Platforms such as this are important for the education and awareness because that's part of how we begin to um you know demystify the taboo of these topics, right? Because even as I was engaging with the candidates the last time around, folks are so scared to even say the word marijuana. Folks are
Listen,
so
listen.
hesitant.
If I can interject respectfully, no, and you're
Yeah,
absolutely right, right? And what I literally just told you about that commission, I've I'm publicly saying it because I've privately shared it with tons of candidates. Hey, run with it, run wild. This is what voters,
yeah.
this is what a significant segment of voters would care about, and those that traditionally
Hmm.
don't come out to vote, this would pique their interest, and at least you'll bring them to the well. And to your point,
Hmm.
none of them, all of them have said, well, I'll wait till I'm elected first, and then we'll revisit it.
Right. And
Sadly,
for me, it, and that's honestly like I harp on these things because it is important that we destigmatize these conversations. We have to really own the narratives of our lived experiences or those of the lived experiences of folks who happen to navigate this built environment similarly or adjacent to us, right? So whether it is those who need those medical cards or people who are suffering and need some sort of non-pharma bro option, right? It goes back to the homeopathic and traditional medicines as well, right? There is and even as you touched also upon something very important also, like the economic impact potential, right? These are all things that tie into how people who have been through traumatic situations, it affects how then they move past it. How do you grow, right? Because if going to bring it tying it back to harassment and assault, right? Let's say women who endure abusive situations, oftentimes they can't leave, or they feel like they can't leave because they're not in the economic or financial place to do so. And this ties into a lot of these kind of like seemingly offshoot situations in life that you know you may find yourself in a situation where then you had to self-medicate. And because we've seen that happen also in the Olympics, little tag here in the recent Olympic happenings. Like these are the realities that we absolutely need to address. We have to take out the shame out of it of needing help, needing to do things differently, rethinking why things were criminalized in the first place, right? Because even when we talk about the legal ramifications of the sentences, like let's take it back to the original opioid crisis, right? Which primarily affected Black and Brown communities of crack versus cocaine, right?
right. I mean,
As
and
soon as
the
the
deterrent
sentences
factor
were,
too. We have to look at,
yeah,
right. Is after a
yeah,
while, you're able to accurately gauge whether something's an effective deterrent or not. So
thank
if you see that something is not an effective deterrent, why would you continue with the same practices, or double down, or so yeah, we have to, we don't audit the outcomes of these penalties, and whether or not the deterrents are effective or not.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And actually also the other reason I really do enjoy talking about this topic from a very technical standpoint is as a transportation professional, you also touched on something that the professional side of things really gets incorrect or really shies about, is because it is criminalized in most cases, especially if you're talking Pennsylvania. The necessary conversations in professional spaces, especially when we talk about research that needs to be done so that appropriate policies are implemented, it really hampers the research. So then it limits it to those areas that it's currently legalized or actually currently what is that, decriminalized, right? So we also again, when we talk about really streamlining the pipeline to policies and to positive changes in the community, these are the conversations that we should be having, not just personally as friends, as family, but also as professionals, right? And I love the fact that you really said it very candidly how you've been trying to get folks to like get on board. Let's really have the conversation, be candid about how you engage with your constituents about this. And folks who are supposed to be representative of us then don't do that until they see fit. To me, I'm like, that's problematic. And to me, that's another, I'll call it what it is. It's an abuse of power. It's an abuse of power because you don't recognize where your power sits. So, any
Absolutely.
final closing remarks?
No. Thank you again for the invitation. It's always a joy to dialogue with you. I hope the viewers, got something meaningful out of it. For you
Yes.
gave the plug to our website. We did a lot of
Yes.
work of overhauling that website. Tons of resource information there. And then lastly, for anyone who is interested in applying for executive clemency, whether pardon for yourself or someone else or for commutation, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'll walk you through this process, start to finish. One of the great things, at least with this administration, and hopefully it carries over to the next, is the pardon process is literally free. So there's no bigger incentive to avail yourself of this process. So make good use of it. So again, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, this is awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man, but again, no, and I appreciate you taking the time to join us here on Let's Harp About It. Family, y'all know what it is. Okay, education and awareness is key out here, as well as understanding ways to prevent harassment, assault, abuse of any and every kind out there, right? Whether it is domestic, child abuse, workplace abuse, police brutality. Yes, that is also a form of abuse. And so, whatever abuse of power, because that's really what it roots down to. Abuse is often rooted in unjust or inequitable power balance. And so we want to restore that balance. We want to do our parts to restore that balance. So I really appreciate the information that has been shared today. If you'd like to connect, please follow up. I will ask Brandon, please just follow up in the comment section, let him know so they could tag or respond however you see fit. And as you said, you can reach out via the Board of Pardons website. That's bop.pa.gov. And if you have any questions also for me on the HARP side of it, cross the social media platforms at harpnow.org. That's HARPNOWORG. Don't forget, we have 2 surveys. One is for general harassment and assault baseline survey, and the other one is specifically for police brutality related incidents. And so please take a moment. Both of those together take less than 5 minutes. Very quick surveys. Go let us know what you think. And yeah, I appreciate all you guys out there for watching. And Secretary Flood, I hope this is not the last time when, as things move along, please understand, open invitation to come back and, re-educate and keep us informed, because there's power in information. It's important for folks to know how to wield that power. And so,
Always
yeah.
plenty.
Come on now. Come on now. I appreciate you. And so, family, friends, and family, stay encouraged in all you do out there. And I'll catch y'all on the next Let's Harp About It. Ciao, y'all.